Iran just answered President Donald Trump's ultimatum, and the answer is no, absolutely not, never. Iran will not surrender, Iran will not capitulate, Iran will not bow to American demands, and Iran will fight to the death. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian, speaking in a televised address from Tehran this morning, March 7, 2026, rejected Trump's demand for unconditional surrender and declared that Iran will resist American aggression until the very end. Pezeshkian said, and I am quoting his exact words translated from Farsi, Iran has never surrendered in its 47-year history. We did not surrender to Saddam Hussein when he invaded our country and killed 1 million of our people. We did not surrender when America imposed crushing sanctions for decades, and we will not surrender now to Donald Trump's threats. Iran will fight, we will resist. And if we must die defending our sovereignty, then we will die as free men, not as slaves to American imperialism. This is the most defiant statement from an Iranian leader since the war began 8 days ago. This is Iran's official response to Trump's comparison to Japan 1945, to Trump's demand for unconditional surrender, and to Trump's threat of total annihilation. Iran is saying, we heard you, we understand what you are threatening, and we reject it completely. We will not surrender. Come and try to destroy us. We are ready. This is now a war with no off-ramps. Trump has demanded total capitulation. Iran has refused. Both sides are locked into positions that make negotiation impossible. And that means the war will continue, will intensify, and will likely last far longer than the 4 to 5 weeks that Trump originally projected. We are only 8 days into this conflict, and already over 1,300 Iranians are dead. 25 Iranian ships are sunk. 3,000 targets have been struck, and Iran is vowing to fight to the death. This is no longer a limited military operation. This is total war, and neither side is willing to back down. Let me walk you through exactly what President Pezeshkian said today, why Iran's refusal to surrender is both predictable and catastrophic, what Trump's response is likely to be, how this guarantees the war will escalate to even more devastating levels, and why the next phase could involve the complete destruction of Iran's infrastructure and the deaths of tens of thousands of civilians. Because we have just crossed the point of no return. Trump gave Iran a choice, surrender or be annihilated. Iran chose annihilation, and now Trump will deliver it. Pezeshkian's address was broadcast on Iranian state television at 9 CU a.m. Tehran time, which is 12:30 a.m. Eastern time in the United States. It was clearly time to reach the Iranian public during the morning news cycle and to reach the American public during the late-night news. Pezeshkian appeared in a dark suit, seated at a desk with the Iranian flag behind him. He looked exhausted, which is understandable given that he has been leading Iran through the most devastating week in the country's modern history, while also serving as interim leader in the absence of a new supreme leader. The Assembly of Experts has still not chosen a successor to Ayatollah Khamenei, who was killed by an American airstrike on February 28th. So Pezeshkian is effectively running the country during wartime with no clear authority structure and no consensus on who will lead Iran in the future. But despite the chaos, Pezeshkian's message was clear and uncompromising. He began by addressing the Iranian people directly. He said, "My fellow Iranians, we are facing the greatest test in our nation's history. The American president has demanded that we surrender. He has compared us to Japan in 1945 and threatened to annihilate us if we do not submit to his will. He wants us to dismantle our military, abandon our sovereignty, and become a puppet state controlled by Washington. But Iran will never accept such humiliation." Pezeshkian then turned to Iran's history of resistance. He invoked the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s, when Saddam Hussein, backed by the United States and other Western powers, invaded Iran and waged an 8-year war that killed an estimated 1 million Iranians. Pezeshkian said, "We faced annihilation then. Saddam used chemical weapons on our soldiers and our civilians. The world watched and did nothing. But we did not surrender. We fought for 8 years. We sacrificed a generation of young men, and we survived. If we could survive that, we can survive Donald Trump." This is a powerful historical reference for Iranians. The Iran-Iraq War is a defining event in modern Iranian history. It is remembered as a war of survival, a war in which Iran stood alone against a brutal aggressor and refused to give up despite impossible odds. By invoking that war, Pezeshkian is telling Iranians, we have been here before. We know how to endure suffering. We know how to resist. And we will do it again. Pezeshkian also invoked the decades of American sanctions that have crippled Iran's economy. He said, America has tried to strangle us economically for over 40 years. They have frozen our assets. They have blocked our oil exports. They have cut us off from the global financial system. They wanted us to collapse. They wanted us to beg for mercy. But we survived. Our people suffered, yes, but we adapted. We built our own industries. We developed our own technologies, and we remained independent. America's sanctions did not break us, and America's bombs will not break us either. This is Pezeshkian framing the current war as just the latest in a long series of American efforts to destroy Iran. And he is arguing that just as Iran survived sanctions, just as Iran survived the Iran-Iraq war, Iran will survive this war. It is a message of resilience and defiance, but it is also a message that guarantees continued conflict. Because if Iran will not surrender and if Trump will not negotiate, then the only possible outcome is escalation until one side is destroyed or collapses. Pezeshkian then addressed Trump directly, and this is where his language became most defiant. He said, to Donald Trump, I say this, Iran will never surrender to you. You can bomb our cities, you can sink our ships, you can kill our people, but you cannot break our spirit. You demand that we dismantle our military and submit to your rule. We refuse. You threaten to annihilate us if we do not comply. Then do it. Send your bombers, fire your missiles. We are not afraid. The Iranian people would rather die standing than live on their knees. We would rather die standing than live on our knees. That is the sentence that will be remembered from this speech. That is the sentence that defines Iran's position. And that is the sentence that makes compromise impossible. Because Pezeshkian is not leaving himself any room to maneuver. He is not saying, we will negotiate under the right conditions, or we are open to dialogue. He is saying, we will fight to the death, period. And he is saying it on national television, in front of the entire Iranian public and the entire world. Pezeshkian cannot walk that back now. If he tried to negotiate after making that statement, he would be seen as weak, as a coward, as someone who talked tough but folded under pressure. So Pezeshkian has locked himself and Iran into a position of total resistance, which means Trump is also locked in, because Trump demanded unconditional surrender, and Iran has publicly refused. So now Trump must follow through on his threat or look weak himself. This is how wars spiral out of control. Both leaders have made public ultimatums that they cannot back down from without losing face. And so both will escalate, even if privately they might prefer a different outcome. Pezeshkian concluded his speech by rallying the Iranian people to continued resistance. He said, to every Iranian, I say this, the coming days will be difficult. The Americans will intensify their attacks. More of our people will die. Our infrastructure will be damaged. Our economy will suffer. But we must endure. We must stand firm. Because if we surrender, Iran, as we know it, will cease to exist. We will become a colony. Our children will grow up as subjects of a foreign power. That is unacceptable. So we fight, not because we want war, but because we have no choice. America has given us only two options, surrender or die. We choose to fight and die as free Iranians rather than live as American slaves. And with that, the speech ended. Pezeshkian stood, saluted, and walked off camera. Iranian state television immediately cut to patriotic music and images of Iranian soldiers, missiles, and flags. The message was clear. Iran is unified. Iran is defiant. And Iran will not give up. Within minutes, Iranian social media exploded with support for Pezeshkian's speech. Hashtags like, or Iran will, never surrender, and we stand with Iran trended globally. Videos of Iranians in Tehran, Isfahan, and other cities gathering in the streets to chant support for resistance circulated widely. And Iranian state media began broadcasting the speech on a loop, ensuring that every Iranian would see it. But the reaction outside Iran was very different. In Washington, Trump's allies praised Pezeshkian's speech as proof that Iran is a fanatical regime that must be destroyed. Senator Lindsey Graham tweeted, Iran just told us they will never surrender and will fight to the death. Good. Let's give them what they want. Total annihilation. Senator Tom Cotton said, Pezeshkian's speech proves that negotiation is impossible. Iran is a death cult. The only language they understand is force. We must destroy them completely. And former Trump advisor John Bolton, who has long advocated for regime change in Iran, said, this is exactly why we need to finish the job. Iran will never change. The regime must be eliminated. But critics of the war saw Pezeshkian's speech as evidence that Trump's ultimatum was a catastrophic mistake. Senator Chris Murphy tweeted, Trump's Japan 1945 comparison backed Iran into a corner. No country can accept unconditional surrender without regime collapse. Trump guaranteed this war will escalate by making an impossible demand. Representative Rokana said, Pezeshkian's speech shows that Trump's strategy has failed. Iran will not surrender. So now we have a choice: endless war or negotiation. Trump has chosen endless war, and Americans will pay the price. And foreign policy analysts warned that Iran's refusal to surrender means the war will drag on for months, possibly years, with devastating humanitarian consequences. But Trump himself has not yet responded publicly to Pezeshkian's speech. Trump is currently at Mar-a-Lago in Florida and has not made any public appearances or statements since yesterday. That in itself is unusual. Trump loves to respond immediately to provocations, but his silence suggests that his advisors are debating how to respond and what the next phase of the war should look like. Because Pezeshkian's speech creates a problem for Trump. Trump demanded unconditional surrender. Iran refused. So now Trump must either escalate massively to try to force Iran to surrender, or he must quietly back away from his ultimatum and accept something less than total victory. And Trump does not back down, which means escalation is coming. Based on conversations with Pentagon officials, analysts, and sources close to the administration reported by CNN, Fox News, and the Wall Street Journal, the next phase of the war will involve the complete destruction of Iran's civilian infrastructure. Trump has held back from striking certain targets because of concerns about civilian casualties and humanitarian consequences. But with Iran refusing to surrender, Trump is likely to authorize attacks on Iran's electrical grid, water systems, fuel distribution, and food supply chains. The goal will be to make life in Iran so unbearable that the Iranian people turn against their government and demand surrender. This is total war. This is not about destroying military targets. This is about destroying the country's ability to function, and it will kill civilians. Not directly in most cases, but indirectly. When you destroy a power plant, hospitals lose electricity and patients die. When you destroy water treatment facilities, people get sick from contaminated water. When you destroy food distribution networks, people go hungry. This is the strategy that was used against Germany and Japan in World War II. It is called strategic bombing. And it works, but at a horrific human cost. The question is whether Trump is willing to accept that cost. And based on his Japan 1945 comparison and his threat of annihilation, the answer appears to be yes. But there is a complication: American public opinion. Right now, polls show that support for the war is declining. A CNN poll released yesterday showed that only 43% of Americans support continued military operations in Iran, down from 58% when the war began. And 61% of Americans say they are concerned about rising gas prices caused by the war. If Trump escalates to total war and images of suffering Iranian civilians flood social media, support could collapse further. Trump could face massive protests, calls for impeachment, and a political crisis that consumes his presidency. But Trump may be calculating that he can win the war quickly enough that public opinion does not matter. If Iran's infrastructure is destroyed within 2 to 3 weeks, if the regime collapses, and if a new pro-American government takes power, Trump can declare victory and end the war before domestic opposition becomes overwhelming. That is the bet Trump is making: destroy Iran so quickly and so completely that the regime has no choice but to collapse. But that bet has a major flaw. Iran is not going to collapse. Pezeshkian just told the world that Iran will fight to the death. And history shows that countries under total war conditions often become more unified, not less. The bombing of German and Japanese cities during World War II did not cause those populations to overthrow their governments. It made them more determined to resist. And it was only after years of bombing, combined with total military defeat on the battlefield, that Germany and Japan surrendered. Iran is not going to surrender because its power grid is destroyed. Iran is going to dig in, endure the suffering, and keep fighting. And that means this war could last months or even years. Which brings us to the next question. Can the United States sustain a war like this? The war is already costing approximately $1 billion per day. That is $7 billion in the first week. If the war lasts 6 months, that is $180 billion. If it lasts a year, that is $365 billion. Those are costs that will have to be paid by American taxpayers, and they are costs that will compete with domestic priorities like healthcare, education, and infrastructure. Congress has not authorized this war. Trump launched it unilaterally. And while Congress voted this week on a resolution to restrict Trump's war powers, Trump vetoed it and Congress did not override. So Trump has a free hand to continue the war indefinitely. But at some point, the political and economic costs will become unsustainable. Gas prices are already up 20 cents per gallon in the past week. Oil is trading at $86 per barrel, up from $70 before the war started. And analysts predict that if the war continues, gas could hit $5 per gallon or higher by summer. Americans will feel that pain every time they fill their tank. And they will blame Trump. So Trump is in a race against time. He needs to win this war quickly or risk a political disaster. But Iran is betting that it can outlast Trump. Iran is betting that American public opinion will turn against the war, that Trump will face domestic pressure to end it, and that Iran can survive long enough for that pressure to force a negotiated settlement on terms more favorable than unconditional surrender. This is a test of wills, and it is a test that will be measured in months, not days. Day 8 of the war. Iran has rejected Trump's ultimatum. Iran will not surrender, and the war will continue. But here is the most important thing to understand. This was always going to happen. Iran was never going to accept unconditional surrender. No country would. Trump's ultimatum was designed to be rejected so that he could justify total war. And now he has that justification. Iran said no, and Trump will say, I gave them a chance. I offered them the opportunity to surrender and save their country. They refused. So now we have no choice but to destroy them. That is the narrative. That is the script. And that is what Trump will use to authorize the next phase of attacks. In the coming days, expect to see strikes on targets that have been off limits until now. Expect to see civilian infrastructure destroyed. Expect to see the death toll climb into the thousands and then tens of thousands. Expect to see images of suffering that will shock the world. And expect Iran to endure it all and keep fighting. Because Pezeshkian just told us, Iran will never surrender. Iran will fight to the death. And Iran means it. So buckle up, because the war just entered a new phase. The phase of total destruction. The phase where both sides are committed to victory or death, and where compromise is impossible. We are 8 days into this war. And it could last 8 months or 8 years, because neither side will back down. Trump demanded surrender. Iran refused. And now the only question is how much destruction will occur before one side collapses or the world intervenes to stop the madness. Iran will never surrender, and Trump will never back down. This is the collision course, and we are all just watching it happen. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because this story is just beginning. Day 8, Iran defiant, Trump silent. And the worst is yet to come. The war continues, and there is no end in sight.